At the time of his death in 1940, Major General Smedley Butler was the most highly decorated Marine in US history. In a book published in 1935, he wrote, "War is a racket. It always has been. It's possibly the oldest, easily the most profitable, surely the most vicious. It is the only one international in scope. It is the only one in which the profits are reckoned in dollars and the losses in lives." Let's imagine a man like Major General Butler knew what he was talking about when it came to the subject of war. As well as physically brave, I would say he was morally courageous to the end of his days. He said that during his 33 years of active military service, he spent most of his time as a, quote, high-class muscle man for big business, for Wall Street and the bankers. In short, he said, "I was a racketeer, a gangster for capitalism." A racket is best described, he said, as something that is not what it seems to the majority of the people. Only a small inside group knows what it's about. It's conducted for the benefit of the very few at the expense of the very many. Out of war, a few people make huge fortunes. I would say it's plain to see that the racket has been going from strength to strength ever since. In his farewell address to the American people in 1961, outgoing President and old soldier Dwight D. Eisenhower warned about the threat posed by what he was already able to identify as the military-industrial complex. Quote, "This conjunction of an immense military establishment and a large arms industry is new in the American experience, yet we must not fail to comprehend its grave implications." This conjunction of an immense military establishment and a large arms industry is new. We must not fail to comprehend its implications. In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. Now, nearly 90 years after Smedley's assessment of the cynical nature of war, the billions of dollars, pounds, euros and the rest continue to flow into the coffers and bank accounts of the few. And who are the few, those beneficiaries of the endless firing of bullets and bombs? Ghouls who see loss of human life only in terms of profitable columns on their balance sheets. It's a tragically accurate adage that young men who don't know each other and don't hate each other are sent to war by old men who do know each other and may or may not hate each other, but who shake hands and split the profits when all the young men are dead. We're still right there in that hellscape, hapless witnesses to the ultimate racket, as hundreds of billions of dollars and pounds flow into Ukraine and then back into the bank accounts of that military-industrial complex. Russian dissident Alexei Navalny has died in prison. US President Joe Biden was quickly thrust in front of the world's media to exploit that death to justify the sending of yet more billions of dollars to Zelensky's Ukraine. He said, "We have to provide the funding so Ukraine can keep defending itself. History is watching. The failure to support Ukraine at this crucial moment will never be forgotten." Former President Donald Trump was impeached in 2019 before any Russian tanks had crossed the Ukrainian border for pausing funds already earmarked for Ukraine, $391 million in security assistance, $250 million through the Department of Defence's Ukraine Security Assistance Initiative, and $141 million through the State Department's Foreign Military Financing Programme. Trump paused all of that because he wanted to investigate alleged Biden family links to Ukraine and was subsequently impeached. According to Republican Senator J.D. Vance, a new bill proposed by the Biden administration guaranteeing a further $61 billion to Ukraine, money earmarked primarily for US arms manufacturers, has within it a clause leaving any attempt by a future president to halt that funding vulnerable to similar proceedings. This has been described as future-proofing the funding of Ukraine against the possibility that Trump or anyone else in future seeks to interrupt the flow of dollars to Ukraine. Biden mourned Navalny's death. Even in prison, he was a powerful voice for the truth, he said. An interesting statement, while journalist Julian Assange, who published Truth Inconvenient to the US and the West, presently rots in Belmarsh Prison as he fights extradition to the US. I'm not yet aware of Biden mentioning, far less lamenting, the death in a Ukrainian prison of US citizen and writer Gonzalo Lira, who was critical of the Zelensky regime. Biden's administration has sought determinedly to jail his and their strongest and most popular opponent, Donald Trump. And yet, in the immediate aftermath of Navalny's death, Biden highlighted Vladimir Putin's desperate attempts to stamp out the opposition. Zelensky, propped up only by Western cash, has crushed his own political opponents as well. The pattern seems clear. Bleat about enemies threatening democracy, while simultaneously and blatantly and hypocritically seeking to trample on democracy at home, or turn a blind eye to the same being carried out by allies, or make that business partners. A legitimate president of Ukraine was overthrown by a US-led coup in 2014. In the early stages of the Russia-Ukraine war, as early as April 2022, a peace deal was on the table until former British Prime Minister Boris Johnson was dispatched by NATO to scupper that deal. Now 500,000 Ukrainian men and boys are dead. The war goes on relentlessly, and a US administration is seeking to undermine democracy so that a multi-billion-dollar war might grind on with no end in sight. Here in the UK, our own homegrown brand of warmongers are banging the drums and rattling the sabres. Defence Secretary Grant Shapps has warned that UK is adapting to a pre-war world. Former Minister Tobias Ellwood has declared there is a 1939 feel to the world and that Britain is not prepared. All of that was before retiring Army Chief General Sir Patrick Sanders advocated the training of a citizen army in readiness for a future land war. Ukraine has used up its available generations of men and boys. Now those Ukrainians who absented themselves from the country in advance of the fighting face the possibility, if new legislation is passed there, of having to return to fight or face the seizure of their bank accounts and other assets. Maybe those men will return and maybe they won't. In any event, they won't be enough to satisfy a meat grinder that is being future-proofed against the possibility of its ever running out of steam. Who will be sent next? Whose sons will be cannon fodder in Ukraine? My sons? Your sons? As the Second World War played out, it wasn't equipment that was in short supply. The military-industrial complex had production well in hand. There was no end of brand new Spitfires and Hurricanes. What was in worryingly short supply was the men and boys fit to fly them. It takes an unavoidable minimum of 16 years to grow a boy to the point where he might become a soldier. And all those years are spent in moments by the ghouls who see only pounds and dollar signs. Smedley Butler knew how the war racket might be smashed. He said number one was the removal of profit from war, and also that military forces should be limited to defence of the homeland. There are only two reasons why you should ever be asked to give your youngsters, he said. One is defence of our homes, the other is the defence of our Bill of Rights, and particularly the right to worship God as we see fit. Every other reason advanced for the murder of young men is a racket, pure and simple. How blatant is it here in the UK and on the other side of the Atlantic in the US that precious little care is being taken of the homelands? In both cases, the borders, that ought surely to be a priority for our governments and fighting men, are left undefended in the face of the arrival of uncounted numbers of strangers arriving day and night. Here and in the US, the cities are filled with more and more crime, more and more violence meted out upon citizens. Of the First World War, Smedley wrote, "Beautiful ideals were painted for our boys who were sent out to die. This was the war to end wars. This was the war to make the world safe for democracy. No one told them that dollars and cents were the real reason. No one mentioned to them as they marched away that their going and their dying would mean huge war profits. No one told those American soldiers that they might be shot down by bullets made by their own brothers here. No one told them that the ships on which they were going to cross the sea might be torpedoed by submarines built with United States patents. They were just told it was to be a glorious adventure." Leaders here and in the US talk a good game about how concerned they are about the death toll of civilians in Gaza, tens of thousands of women and children among them. But still the profitable bombs and bullets fly in the sky there. The coffers of the same few grow more bloated yet. I say we must swim clear of the warmongers who make blood money in our name. The horrors of the 20th century were supposed to serve as unforgettable lessons, but there's precious little sign that much of anything was learned. Talk of a citizen army reeks of the rhetoric of 1915 and Kitchener that led to the horror of the Somme, where 60,000 British men fell in a single day, nearly 20,000 rendered into butchered meat. I don't believe the majority of mothers and fathers here, or in the US, or in Russia for that matter, want to see their sons and daughters condemned to die in a Third World War. Here's the thing, war is a racket, the oldest, the most profitable, the most vicious. We see the racketeers. The Pentagon cannot even pass an audit to explain where all those billions of dollars actually go, how precisely they are spent, and yet always the call is for more. While Joe Biden ramped up the anti-Russian rhetoric in the wake of Navalny's death on this side of the pond, Zelensky addressed a gathering of security and foreign policy officials at the annual Munich Security Conference. where yet more deals were surely struck to oil the wheels of the meat grinder. Here we are with a forever war potentially future-proofed against any end of its funding, where democracy is sidestepped at home by those who would send our sons to die in the hollow name of democracy abroad. In any event, there's no talk of peace, only of war. It really is a racket. The only meaningful question is this: how long will we submit to a world run by racketeers and gangsters?